Hello again, and God's peace and mercy to all of you from Metro Manila, the Philippines, Southeastern Asia. It has now become apparent that the incumbent US President Donald Trump, who was running for a second term in office, has been defeated. He has even reluctantly, albeit half-heartedly, acknowledged or conceded his defeat. So, given the fact that at least tens of millions of Christians, perhaps hundreds of millions of Christians worldwide had been more or less passionately in favor of Donald Trump, or at least had fairly high hopes for the defense of Christian values in the United States and perhaps even worldwide as a result of his claim to want to defend the Christian faith and values. And then some were thrilled this past August 2020 by the so-called Abraham Accords, whereby two Persian Gulf states, Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates, signed a peace treaty with Israel and acknowledged Israel as an independent state and promised to have diplomatic relations with it. And shortly before the US presidential elections in October 2020, even Sudan, a Muslim country in Eastern Africa, agreed to do the same. Some people, especially those of the Christian right, saw Trump either as a modern-day King Cyrus or as a modern-day King David. Some even claimed that he was the second coming of God, or a powerful chosen one whom God would use to accelerate the processes which lead to Jesus Christ's second coming. But then there were those who realistically saw him as a deeply flawed individual, an individual who is desperately in need of Jesus Christ above all, and prayed for him accordingly, and continue to pray for him now that he has been defeated in his bid for re-election. So what should we as true Christians, as born-again Bible-believing Christians, some of us even Spirit-filled Christians, be doing now? Above all, we should look toward Jesus Christ. We should not put our trust in any single human being, whether he or she be a political leader, a would-be political leader, even a church leader, an educational, cultural, economic, or some other leader, civil service leader. No. We should above all put our trust in God. In Psalm 146, it is said, "Do not put your trust in a human being, because he cannot help, but rather put your trust in God." I'm now freely paraphrasing it. And this has happened time and again in church history. There have been numerous times when political leaders or would-be political leaders or other leaders have had a large or even huge number of Christian admirers and followers, and then those Christians have been more or less disappointed by the end of those leaders' rule or reign. Why? Because they have been fallible human beings. Some of them have definitely been wolves in sheep's clothing, charlatans. Others have been more or less sincere, but all of them have been imperfect. None of them have achieved exactly everything. None of them have been perfect. So we as Christians can be greatly tempted to believe that as long as we just had more godly leaders in office, as politicians, as civil servants, as educators, as cultural leaders, as economic leaders, and other leaders, our societies would be better, more people would get saved, our churches would grow, and this is a great longing for many true Christians in the Western countries, especially in Europe, Australia and New Zealand, also Canada, and to some extent the United States, where so many churches are actually getting smaller. However, we should not first and foremost put our faith, our trust and hope in those people, because they are people. They are fallible human beings. Even those of them who are truly righteous cannot do everything. They are not, none of them is God Almighty. None of them knows exactly what lies ahead. none of them can overcome all the challenges, but God can. So regardless of who are in office as politicians or other leaders, God has not abandoned and will never abandon his true children who want to abide in him. And rather than hankering for Trump's belated return to office in 2025, as some so-called prophecies have claimed, should he be defeated this year, as has now become very, very likely, we should above all look towards the return of Jesus Christ and ask, Lord, how do you want to use me? How can I spread the gospel? For example, in the social media. So we should no longer, in these last times before Jesus Christ's return, look for some earthly Messiah or substitute Messiah. And that was probably one of the reasons why God allowed Donald Trump to lose his bid for re-election, aside from the fact that Donald Trump needed this kind of humiliation to see the fact that the world doesn't revolve around him. He can't always get everything he wants. Even the United States doesn't revolve around him. And as one brother in the Lord, who apparently has a gift of prophecy, told Dr. Michael Brown, one of the most prominent, although by no means one of the most uncritical supporters of Donald Trump in the US charismatic community. Dr. Michael Brown is of Jewish origin, by the way. Had told Trump is done, and anyway, the message had been to the effect that God has allowed Trump to be defeated because the church has idolized him. And I'm afraid that I have to sadly agree with that assessment. So we'll just see what will happen during this decade of the 2020s, how many of these so-called defenders of the Christian values will turn out to be something less than righteous, how many will be defeated in their bids for re-election, how many will be re-elected but not really produce the kinds of lasting hard changes that some idealistic Christians would like them to produce. And anyway, since we are clearly in the end times, we should above all try to prepare ourselves to be ready always for the return of Jesus Christ, also always be ready for our physical death, and ask Jesus Christ to so cleanse us and fill us, transform us, that we could be his witnesses, even we, like the undersigned, who are lay Christians, who have no spiritual office, who have no formal theological training. But God still can and wants to use us, of course, always for his glory. So everything is not lost. The United States is not going to go straight to hell just because Donald Trump lost and Joe Biden won. This regardless of the fact that Joe Biden has clearly more consistently secular values than Donald Trump does. Nor would the United States have ascended right to heaven if Donald Trump had been re-elected. And nor would that happen if Donald Trump managed in 2024 to come back and win the US presidential elections of that year and then return to office for a second separate presidential term in January 2025. Even in the unlikely case that that happened, we never should put our hope in that. Because I see in this desperate desire on the part of many Christians worldwide, not only in the United States, but also elsewhere in North America, in Latin America and Europe, in Africa, Asia, and to some extent in Oceania, of really passionately supporting certain political candidates who either claim to be born-again Christians or even are truly born-again Christians, or claim to be defenders of the Christian faith and values or of the Judeo-Christian heritage and whatever. We should not believe in the so-called Kingdom Now heresy, according to which we Christians are going to take over power in our families, in our churches, in our schools and other educational institutions, in our governments, including our legislatures, in our mass media, not just our social media, and then in the arts and entertainment, and even in the business world. And only then, supposedly, Jesus Christ can come back. Jesus Christ, fortunately, didn't support this heresy. He prophesied to us clearly in, for example, Matthew's and Mark's and Luke's Gospels, the kinds of difficulties that we would face. Apostle Paul uh, prophesied to his disciple Timothy, or student Timothy, in the first epistle to Timothy, that there would be perilous times, tough times in the last days before the second coming of Jesus Christ. So they didn't put their trust in any earthly kingdom, in any Kingdom Now theology. Neither did Peter, neither did John, neither did Jude, neither did the other apostles. But above all, they put their trust in God, and so should we. May God bless you and keep you and empower you to be witnesses for Jesus Christ, regardless of whether you're lay Christians or theology students or theologians or full-time or part-time ministers of the gospel or Christian media workers or personalities. Put your trust above all in God, not in political or other human leaders.